We've spent the last few days watching the silver market glitch in real time. Flash crashes that don't make sense. Dealers out of stock when price says they shouldn't be. Premiums refusing to come down. And that weird gap. New York printing one story while Shanghai trades a completely different reality. These aren't random headlines, they're symptoms, the kind you see when a system is stressed past its design limits. But here's the part nobody is talking about. While traders were glued to their screens and the algorithms were fighting over pennies, the biggest event in modern silver history didn't happen on an exchange. It happened quietly, on paper, inside the White House. On Wednesday, January 14, 2026, President Trump signed a document that changes the rules of the game. Most people will scroll right past it, because it looks like boring government paperwork. And that's exactly why it matters. Because if you actually read the language, if you slow down and parse what it's authorizing, you realize this isn't policy fluff. It's a line in the sand. For the first time in generations, the US government is basically admitting something the market has tiptoed around for decades. Keeping critical minerals cheap isn't a benefit. It's a vulnerability, a national security problem. And when Washington uses the words national security, that's not a vibe, that's a trigger. In government language, threat unlocks tools that don't exist in normal times. But the real bombshell, the detail that most people will miss unless they read the fine print, is tucked into one specific paragraph. Because in plain English, it quietly opens the door to something that would have sounded impossible a year ago. Price floors. Not a rumor, not a meme, an official option on the table. And once you understand what that means, you'll never look at spot the same way again. Something just changed, and it didn't happen on your chart. You can stare at spot all day, watch candles print like they always have, and still miss the real event. Because what's moving now isn't silver. It's the rules underneath silver. The old assumption was simple. Price is a signal. The market speaks, and everyone reacts. But that only works when the market is allowed to clear. When a metal becomes a mission-critical input, tied to industrial capacity, electrification, and defense supply chains, price stops being a discovery mechanism and starts looking like a control panel. Here's the uncomfortable part. Governments don't need silver to be cheap or expensive. They need it to be available. They need stable costs, predictable contracts, uninterrupted production, and zero surprises at the worst possible moment. And once that becomes the priority, spot turns into a reference number, not the truth. The truth shifts to policy language, procurement rules, and the quiet decisions that keep mines running and factories fed. So if you're still treating this like a normal commodity story, like it's just inflation, just rates, just a technical breakout, you're playing the wrong game. This is a regime change, a rewrite, the kind of pivot where the public quote can look calm while the system underneath is being engineered for one outcome: no strategic shortages, no production shocks, no supply chain snap. And that's why this isn't a chart story anymore. It's a policy story, written in documents, deadlines, and national security. Words that don't show up in candlesticks until it's too late. If the first section was the warning, the rules are being rewritten, then the next question is obvious. Where is the rewrite happening? Not on CNBC. Not in a trader's thread. It's happening in plain sight. Inside official language that most people never read. Because here's what changes everything. The government isn't just watching the market anymore. It's quietly giving itself permission to shape the market when a material becomes strategic. This is the pivot the narrative wants you to catch. For years, the public story was always the same. Markets set prices, supply adjusts, and policy stays hands-off. But that's a peacetime myth. When a metal starts touching industrial output and national security planning, the state stops pretending the invisible hand will save the supply chain. It starts building visible tools, programs, incentives, procurement rules, designed to make one outcome more likely than another. And the keyword that should make you sit up is price floors. Not a rumor, not a meme, not a YouTube catchphrase. A floor is a policy concept, one that says, in effect, we will not allow this input to get too cheap to produce. Because too cheap doesn't mean good deal. It means mines shut, projects get cancelled, and capacity disappears right when it's needed most. Once that logic enters official frameworks, the entire pricing story flips. Spot can still print a clean number, but scarcity doesn't care about clean numbers. Scarcity shows up in delays, premiums, contract clauses, and emergency procurement. That's the gap this section is pointing at. The moment policy legitimizes intervention, public price and real-world availability can start living in two different worlds. So what does a price floor actually do in the real world? Not in a headline? Think of it like insurance written into the system. When the price drops to a level that would normally force mines to cut output, delay projects, or shut lines, the floor kicks in, not as a press conference, but as a mechanism. It can look like strategic buying that absorbs excess supply, subsidies that keep marginal production alive, guarantees that backstop financing, or contract structures that lock in minimum economics for producers. Different wrapper, same effect. The downside gets padded. That's why the script compares it to a put option embedded in policy. Producers don't need perfect prices, they need survivable prices. Protect the downside, and you remove the panic button that normally triggers shutdowns. And once shutdown risk is reduced, supply becomes steadier, exactly what policymakers want when the material is strategic. Here's the twist. Floors aren't designed to make silver expensive. They're designed to prevent a cheap price collapse that would quietly destroy capacity. Because when capacity dies, you don't rebuild it on a timeline that matches industrial demand. And once that floor exists, the market stops clearing naturally. Paper price can still trade, still discover, still look orderly, but it's now trading inside guardrails. At that point, price isn't just economics, it's policy. And once you see the floor as a built-in backstop, the next question hits even harder. Why would anyone need this now? Why not 5 years ago? Why not let the market do its job, like it always claimed to? Because the story widens from pricing into pressure. Industrial demand isn't a nice-to-have anymore. It's climbing into must-deliver territory. While dependable supply is anything but guaranteed, in that environment, a sudden production drop isn't just a bad quarter for miners. It becomes a bottleneck for electrification, advanced manufacturing, and systems that governments don't want paused for market reasons. That's the deliberate reframing. Silver stops being an investment metal and starts reading like infrastructure. And infrastructure is not allowed to behave like a meme stock. Volatility might be entertaining on a chart, but it's unacceptable in a supply chain that's feeding factories, grids, and defense-linked procurement. So when you hear future stress signals, premiums rising, delivery times stretching, inventories thinning, strange regional tightness, the script is telling you not to treat it as random chaos. Treat it as a predictable symptom of a system running hot, demand leaning forward, supply constrained, and policy quietly holding the floor so production doesn't buckle. In other words, the market isn't breaking. It's being kept from breaking because the consequences are bigger than price. And this is where the tone shifts from industrial pressure to something far more serious, because once a material is treated like infrastructure, the next label is almost inevitable: national security threat. That phrase isn't just dramatic language. It's a legal and political unlock. The moment the state frames silver as strategic, it gains permission to use tools that would look unthinkable in a normal commodity market. Intervention stops being controversial and starts being justified. Stockpiling becomes prudent. Prioritizing certain buyers becomes risk management. Pressuring supply chains becomes resilience. And the public doesn't get a vote, because the stated goal is stability, not debate. Here's the part most people miss. When the security framework comes in, transparency often goes out, not because someone is hiding a conspiracy, but because strategic planning isn't run like a retail market. Decisions happen through procurement, contracts, classifications, and behind-the-scenes coordination. Control increases, visibility decreases, and spot keeps printing like nothing changed. That's the mental model flip this section is designed to force. You're not watching a commodity find its fair price. You're watching a strategic material get absorbed into a system that values predictable access over price discovery. In that system, the chart becomes a lagging indicator, and policy becomes the leading one. Once national security, enters the conversation. The next move is always the same. A clock appears. Not a market clock, an administrative one. A defined window. A fixed deadline. The kind of timeline that quietly turns an idea into a machine. That's why the script emphasizes a countdown beat. Something like a 180-day runway. Because policy doesn't meander when the label is strategic. Once the process starts, it cascades. Agencies align. Procurement language hardens. Industrial commitments get written into contracts. Downstream buyers adjust sourcing rules, inventory targets, and delivery terms. And without a single dramatic headline, the ecosystem reprices itself from the inside out. This is the moment where waiting for confirmation on the chart becomes a trap. Charts are reaction. Policy is initiation. By the time the price action looks obvious, the decisions that caused the shift have already been made.